My next guest is a comedy icon. You all know him as J.J. Evans from the legendary sitcom Good Times.
There's always a sliver of truth behind rumors, and Jimmie Walker's recent revelations have just proven it. For decades, whispers and controversies followed him, yet he never chased them away. Instead, he lived quietly, carrying himself with dignity while letting the world wonder. Many fans assumed the truth would never surface and ran along with their speculation for years. But now at 78, Jimmie has finally decided to break his silence. What long-standing mysteries did he finally clear up? Why, after all these years, did he choose this moment to speak his truth? Join us as we reveal what the 78-years-old actor revealed that shocked his fans. The humble Bronx beginnings. Jimmie Walker's life has always been wrapped in controversial questions and gossip. For years, many people claimed that he was nothing but a silly comic who had no sense of loyalty and made his own community look bad. Others pointed to his political views, saying they pushed him away from Hollywood. Many wondered why, even now at 78, he has no wife, no children, and no family of his own. For decades, Walker stayed quiet. But now, at an age when most people slow down, he has finally spoken up, admitting that the whispers carried more truth than people ever guessed. To truly understand Jimmie's story, we need to take it from the root. His story began in the Bronx in 1947. He grew up in a noisy neighborhood where honking cars replaced silence and poverty was a daily reality. His father was mostly gone, and his mother worked hard to keep food on the table. But it was never enough. He often said they had nothing but hope, because if you didn't dream big, the Bronx could swallow you whole. Those struggles molded him. As a skinny teenager in the 1960s, Jimmie found himself inspired one night by a comedy act he heard on the radio. Something clicked. Without training and money, he started practicing jokes in front of a mirror. Every silly face between genuine smiles became part of his act. His style leaned on making fun of himself, and it made people laugh harder than he ever imagined. By the late 1960s, he was chasing that dream in small New York nightclubs. These smoky, dimly lit rooms became his classroom. Night after night, he refined his timing and his delivery, slowly shaping a style that stood out from the rest. Laughter gave him power. It turned a poor boy into the center of attention, and that feeling pushed him forward. Then came his big break. In the early 1970s, American TV was opening doors for more black characters and stories. Shows like Sanford and Son and The Jeffersons were proof that audiences wanted change.
Well, Bo Diddley! Hey, Uncle Fred. Come on here.
At that time, legendary producer Norman Lear was building a new sitcom called Good Times. Lear wanted a fresh face, someone funny and different. When Jimmie Walker auditioned, his raw, offbeat energy made Lear laugh so hard that the decision was instant. Walker played J.J. Evans. The show launched in 1974. At first, J.J. was just a side character. But everything changed during one scene when Jimmie shouted his now famous catchphrase, "D-Y-N-O-M-I-T-E." The studio audience exploded with laughter, and producers quickly realized they had struck gold. Within months, kids on playgrounds and adults in bars were repeating the word. It became part of the culture, even reaching the White House. Almost overnight, Jimmie Walker went from an unknown comic to a household name. Magazines praised him as the standout face of 1970s sitcoms. But fame came fast, and the spotlight brought both glory and challenges. Still, his journey from a struggling boy in the Bronx to a national star proved that humor could open doors that once seemed impossible. How did this single word, spoken in the right moment, manage to alter the course of Jimmie Walker's entire fate and shape the legacy he would carry for the rest of his life? Good Times and Dynamite. Within a single season, Jimmie Walker's world tour was almost unrecognizable. He went from late-night comedy clubs to magazine covers, talk shows, and even the White House stage. America just could not get enough of him. Every week, millions tuned in to see J.J. Evans, the skinny kid with wild energy and a catchphrase that echoed across playgrounds and living rooms. Dynamite.
Aren't you glad you lit your fingers duty walking? Cause you got kids and dynamite!
But what looked like pure success on the outside began creating storms behind the cameras. The attention Walker received soon shifted the balance on Good Times. Veteran actors Esther Rolla and John Amos, who played J.J.'s parents, started feeling that the show was no longer about the struggles of a family, but instead about one son who was written to act like a fool. For Esther Rolla, the issue was personal. In interviews, she made it clear she didn't want black audiences to be represented by a character who only cracked jokes and shouted catchphrases. She argued that J.J. lacked depth, saying he came across as a clown when the role should have shown strength, responsibility, and respect. Her words hit Walker's image hard, as if she was publicly questioning the very reason the show had become a hit. John Amos, who played the father, shared those feelings. He fought openly with writers and producers, insisting the show was moving away from its purpose to lay emphasis on love and survival inside a struggling black household. By 1976, the tension grew too heavy. Amos walked away, and producers quickly wrote his character out of the story by killing him off in a car crash. Fans were shocked, but Amos later explained that he couldn't stay in a show where J.J. was turned into a walking joke. The media, however, painted a different picture. To many, Walker was seen as the untouchable star of CBS, their golden boy, who would be protected even at the cost of losing veteran actors. That label stuck, whether he wanted it or not. Not long after, Esther Rolla also left the sitcom. She admitted she couldn't continue on a show where laughs mattered more than honesty. Her absence left a huge gap. For 2 seasons, the Evans family had no mother figure, and the series struggled. Ratings dropped sharply. CBS eventually convinced Rolla to return for the last season, but the damage was already done. Her working relationship with Walker never recovered. When the show ended in 1979, whispers followed. People said the warmth between Rolla and Walker on screen was just an act. Behind the scenes, they were distant, sometimes even cold. The talk became stronger years later when Walker was noticeably missing from Rolla's funeral in 1998. Some claimed he stayed away on purpose, still unwilling to face the past. How true were these allegations about the lack of warmth between Jimmie and Raleigh? And did Jimmie ever explain his absence at her funeral? The backstage battles. For almost 40 years, Jimmie Walker refused to explain himself. He made no attempts to fix the stories people told about him. Unfortunately, his choice to remain silent only fueled more curiosity. Fans assumed he and Esther Rolla never repaired their broken relationship. Hollywood insiders pointed to their rift as an example of how early black sitcoms carried deep tensions beneath the laughter. Then, at 78, Walker finally opened up when people least expected him to. In a rare interview, he admitted what many had suspected all along. Rolla disliked how J.J. Evans was written. She thought the role lacked dignity and turned into a one-note joke. Walker explained that although they were never enemies, they also were never close. He said her frustration was mostly with the writers, not him personally. But by then, the wound had lasted decades, and the distance between them never healed. It was the first time Walker pulled down the wall of silence, and many were shocked. After years of speculation, he confirmed that the friction on Good Times had been real, and fans were right all along. For him, it wasn't just a show business drama. The backstage battles shaped more than his career. It shaped his reputation and even his private life. When most people look back on Good Times, they remember the loud catchphrase,
JJ, stop shouting. I mean, just because we're separated doesn't mean we can't be friends.
the burst of laughter, and the playful character that children imitated for years. But within the television industry, the show's story became something else entirely. A warning about how too much focus on one character can shatter the balance of a cast. The sitcom, meant to show strength in a black family, instead collapsed under the shadow of a single role. Walker, who once stood as the brightest star, found himself isolated, both on-screen and off. That isolation only grew deeper when his political beliefs became public. If backstage fights had created distance with his co-stars, his political statements created even bigger divisions with Hollywood itself. What were his political views, and why did it have such a drastic effect on his career and his people saw him? Breaking his silence. While most black entertainers lean toward the Democratic Party, seeing it as tied to the civil rights struggle, Walker openly went the other way. Regardless of people's view, he didn't just vote quietly, he announced it to the world. In 2012, during an appearance on Fox News, he declared that he had never voted for a Democrat. The statement landed like a bomb. In an industry long known for progressive ideals, his words were seen as a bold challenge. Headlines exploded across entertainment and political outlets, placing Walker at the center of a storm. He praised Ronald Reagan, calling him an inspiring leader, and later spoke favorably about Donald Trump, saying he found Trump practical and believed Republican policies were better for black communities. These views stood in sharp contrast to the majority of his peers. Many in the black community saw him as turning his back on shared struggles. Some even called him a betrayer. Articles and debates asked the same burning question: why would one of television's first black superstars stand with a political party often accused of ignoring black voices? To this day, that question still follows Jimmie Walker, as much a part of his legacy as the laughter he once brought to millions. Jimmie Walker's outspoken views made him one of the most divisive figures in entertainment. While Hollywood circles grew distant, conservative voices began praising him. Many commentators described him as one of the rare entertainers who had the courage to speak freely, even if it meant breaking away from what they saw as Hollywood's narrow consensus. To some, he had become a brave truth-teller. To others, he looked like a man who had abandoned his own roots. By the time the 2000s and 20s arrived, the contrast between his past fame and his later career was clear. In the 1970s, he had been the lively face of Good Times, a household name across America. But decades later, his career in television and film had nearly disappeared. His refusal to soften his views made him a difficult fit for an industry that valued unity and trend following. Producers no longer discussed him, and talk shows seldom invited him. Yet, he did not fade away completely. He continued to travel across the country, performing stand-up comedy in different states, keeping a connection with audiences even as his mainstream visibility declined. Observers noted that Walker never once showed regret for the road he had chosen. He often made it clear that he lived by what he believed, and that if Hollywood rejected him for it, he was prepared to accept the cost. People saw this as the response of someone fully aware of the price of independence. He was willing to lose fame, friendships, and roles. But he would not abandon his convictions simply to gain acceptance. Looking back on his career, people remembered not only his famous sitcom role and his catchphrase, but also the path he carved as a black entertainer, unafraid to challenge expectations. Some saw him as a contrarian voice, bold and unwilling to follow the crowd. Others described him as a divisive figure whose choices separated him from his community. Whether admired or criticized, it was clear that his beliefs had become just as much a part of his legacy as his comedy. Controversy deepened when he addressed other social issues. In 2012, during a CNN interview, he was asked about same-sex marriage. He explained that he did not personally support it, but added that if it became law, he would not oppose it. His words placed him in a middle ground that was rare in America's political climate. While he refused to endorse the idea, he also refused to campaign against it.
His earliest bits, Dave was not really a stand-up. He was a witticism.
To some, his views sounded too conservative. To others, it appeared balanced. Yet even this attempt at moderation brought heavy criticism. His views on affirmative action created another storm. He often remarked that while the policy had once been necessary after the civil rights movement, its time had passed. He believed it now encouraged dependency and created unfairness. Many accused him of forgetting the struggles of black Americans, while others argued that he was brave enough to say a hard truth. Through it all, his opinions kept him in the spotlight as a polarizing figure, long after his sitcom days had ended. However, knowing that his stance was doing more harm than good to a career that he worked hard to build, why did he continue to publicly maintain his stance, sacrificing his dreams for his personal beliefs? And why were his political views a trigger for people? Politics and controversy. To understand why Jimmie Walker became such a controversial figure, it helps to look at the time he chose to speak out. In 2012, America was still deeply divided over issues like same-sex marriage and affirmative action. For many, those subjects were tied directly to the civil rights legacy. So when Walker openly said he did not support same-sex marriage and called affirmative action outdated, the reaction was immediate. Fans who had grown up watching J.J. Evans, the goofy son from Good Times, were stunned. To them, it felt as though Walker was rejecting the very policies meant to support the black community he once represented on screen. These views made him stand apart, not just from Hollywood, but also from much of the African-American artistic community. The backlash was strong. Walker had no history of scandals, no messy divorces, and no tabloid arrests. Yet his opinions alone were enough to mark him as one of the most divisive black entertainers of his generation. Agree or disagree, no one could deny one fact: Jimmie Walker never chose the safe road. He always spoke bluntly, even if it cost him fans, friendships, or respect. His personal life reflected that same independence. While Hollywood buzzed with big weddings, bitter divorces, and children growing up in the spotlight, Walker chose a very different path. He never married, never had children, and never apologized for it. Over and over again in interviews, he repeated the same line: "I have never been married. I have no kids. And that's how it's going to be." This wasn't a joke or a publicity stunt. It was a decision he stood by for decades. Of course, that didn't stop the gossip. Reporters speculated about his private relationships, and one rumor in particular shook headlines in the early 2000s. Several outlets claimed Walker was secretly dating Ann Coulter, the outspoken conservative commentator famous for her fiery opinions. The pairing sounded so unlikely that when comedian Norm Macdonald casually announced on a talk show that Ann Coulter is going out with Jimmie Walker, the story exploded. Suddenly, newspapers, magazines, and TV shows across the country were covering it. People magazine even called them the most unlikely couple in America. The rumor lasted for years, mostly because neither Walker nor Coulter gave a straight answer. Coulter spoke warmly about him, saying he was one of the kindest, funniest, and most genuine people she had ever met. Walker, however, chose to stay silent, leaving everyone guessing. Were they lovers, close friends, or simply two public figures whose connection was misread? No one ever knew for sure. What made the situation more fascinating was Walker's attitude toward his solitude. While many found it strange that a man with fame, money, and charm would live alone, Walker saw it as freedom. He explained that he had watched too many colleagues get married, then divorced, and end up miserable. For him, avoiding marriage and children wasn't loneliness, it was clarity. He believed he wasn't built for those responsibilities, so he simply never took them on. Public opinion was split. Some admired his honesty, while others thought it was sad. But like every choice Jimmie Walker ever made, it was completely his own. Public opinion was split, but like every choice Jimmie Walker ever made, it was completely his own. Was his solitary path a sign of strength, or the cost of living life entirely on his own terms? Text wrapping break. A life of solitude and persistence. Some people still see Jimmie Walker as an odd figure in Hollywood, a man who wanted no part in marriage or raising children. Others admired him for his honesty, believing he was proof that not everyone had to live by society's rules. On social media, he was often called the loner star. At 78, that image still fits. He has never had a wedding, never been a father, and has never shown a sign of changing. To him, it isn't strange. It's simply his truth, a life lived on his own terms. His famous phrase, "DYNOMITE," carried him from a tough Bronx childhood to national stardom. But it also became a trap, locking him inside the shadow of J.J. Evans. After Good Times, his career slowly dimmed. There was still laughter, still lights, but never again the explosive heights of the 1970s. The 1980s brought a few roles. Walker appeared in the hit comedy Airplane. In 1980, earning cheers even with just a few lines. He popped up on shows like The Love Boat, Fantasy Island, The Drew Carey Show, and Scrubs. But these appearances were short and scattered, reminders of who he once was rather than steps into a new chapter. With acting roles drying up, Walker returned to where it all began, the stand-up stage. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he toured across America, performing in small clubs, casinos, and theaters. The crowds were far smaller than the millions who once watched him on CBS, but for Walker, the laughter still mattered.
All right, comedian Jimmie Walker is in town performing tonight and tomorrow at Comedy at the Carlson. And
"Television can forget you," he said. "But if I get on stage and people still laugh, then I still exist." The applause in smoky clubs wasn't the same as national fame, but it gave him purpose. Still, there was a bittersweet truth. Audiences loved Jimmie Walker, but mostly they loved J.J. Evans. Wherever he went, people waited for him to shout, "DYNOMITE." He admitted openly, "I never really escaped J.J. Evans. I know it, and I've learned to accept it." At 78, Walker is still performing. He continues to tour, still takes small film roles, and still brings his sharp, blunt humor to audiences. His net worth is modest, reported between $500,000 and $1.5 million, but it is enough to live comfortably, and that was the life he wanted for himself. Unlike many of his peers, he never chased mansions or luxury cars. Instead, he chose a simple life, moving with his tour schedule, often living in temporary apartments near his gigs. In 2025, Walker shared the stage with comedian Lenny Clark in Martha's Vineyard, proving he can still make people laugh. That same year, he acted in Forgotten Fortune, a small film shot in Oklahoma. He joked about joining late and not knowing the full script, but admitted he still loved being in front of the camera. He is also preparing a new book about his career and his views on how political correctness has changed comedy, following his 2012 memoir. Even beyond entertainment, Walker remains active. In 2024, he supported a skin cancer awareness campaign, showing he still wants to connect with the public in meaningful ways. Jimmie Walker may never leave behind vast estates or dozens of starring roles, but he will forever be remembered for one phrase: DYNOMITE.
You got the number right, because you are talking to Kid a Dynamite!
A single word that captured the spirit of a generation and kept his name alive long after the cameras stopped rolling. Do you think Jimmie Walker ever regrets some of the decisions that he made that led to his fall from grace? Do you think his decision to stay unmarried might have something to do with how he grew up, or something even more traumatic? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.